Greetings, members of the 360 Global Network. Dr. Mario Escobedo with another training video, because we want to make sure that we are doing all that we can to do our part in seeing the church become everything that God designed and destined it to be. We're continuing our study, our series on 5 steps to study any passage of the Bible. I hope you've been keeping up with each of the videos, because each one of the steps builds on the previous videos. So with that in mind, if you haven't yet seen the previous videos, I would encourage you to stop this video, go back and check out videos 1 through 3. This is step 4, so videos 1 through 3. There's a playlist that's linked in the description of this video. And again, each one of these steps builds on the previous steps. So don't skip a step, do it all in order. And if you have been following the order, then I hope you've studied and applied these steps to one passage that you've been studying recently, or even the passage that we're using as our sample passage. As a brief review, here's what we've done so far. Divide the passage into thought units. We then identified the main idea of each thought unit, and then in the most recent step, we identified the main idea of the entire passage, which I am calling the key center. And so up to this point, this is what our passage looks like after studying it. So you see the 4 columns, each one represents a thought unit. What you see highlighted in blue is the main idea for each individual thought unit. And then at the very end, what you see highlighted in red, that's the main idea for the entire passage, or what we're calling the key center. So those are the steps we've covered up to this point. And in this video, we're doing step number 4, which is write the exegetical truth, or you can also call it the central truth. Either one of those will do, but I'll tell you in just a little bit why I prefer to refer to it as the exegetical truth. Now, let me define what I mean when I say exegetical truth. What are we talking about? The exegetical truth, this is how I define it. It's a statement in your own words of the central event or the central truth the passage presents. The purpose of the exegetical truth is to state only what happened in the passage. Now, let me break down a little bit of this definition. Notice that I wrote at the very beginning, it's a statement in your own words. I wrote that because up until this point, for each step, all we've been doing is analyzing the text. And when we identified main ideas, all we did was that, identify. And I emphasized in steps 2 and 3 that when we identify the main idea of the thought units, step 2, and the entire passage, step 3, that we're identifying using only the words of the biblical text itself. I said, no paraphrasing, no summarizing, no using your own words. Well, it's now in this step that we are going to use our own words as we craft an exegetical truth. And what's very important here is that we are only describing what happened in the text. That's it. Only what happened in the text in your own words, but very key. I'm going to hammer this in. I'm going to emphasize this. We're only talking about what happened in the biblical text itself, or what was presented in the biblical text itself. Think of it this way. At this stage, we're still staying in the there and then. The then and there. We're not quite over yet at the here and now. And let me tell you why this is important, and this is partly why I refer to this as the exegetical truth as opposed to something like the central truth. It's for this reason. Basically, any exegetical process, any hermeneutical process or process of Bible study, you can categorize it into 3 main components: observation, interpretation, and application. Those are broad categories, right? But those are mainly the three stages of studying any text of the Bible: observation, interpretation, application. And anybody who teaches the Bible probably follows some version of observation, interpretation, application. And the way I explain these 3 stages is the following. Observation is, what does it say? What does the passage say? Then interpretation is, what does it mean? And application is, well, what do I do with it? What do I do with what it means and what it says? And very, very, very important is this first stage, the observation stage. And in my experience in both studying the Bible and teaching the Bible, the order, the sequence of observation, interpretation, application is very important. When you start with interpretation or application and you ignore observation, or you don't spend enough time in the observation stage, that's where you can very easily get into wrong teachings or taking passages out of context, making a passage say what it never intended to say. Those are the dangers of ignoring the observation stage or not giving enough time and responsibly studying, doing your Bible study and spending enough time in the observation stage. And really all the steps that we've been doing up to this point are all in the observation phase. We're not yet into interpretation or application, because really interpretation and application are built on observation. What does it mean and what do I do with it has to be built on what does it say. Because if we don't know what it says in its original context to its original recipients, what I call the targeted reader, if we don't have a responsible understanding at that observation stage, then we're not going to have a proper interpretation and we're not going to have a proper application. We might have some good applications, but they might not be directly reflected in the text. This is why it's so important that we do this stage responsibly and we spend as much time as is necessary here at the observation stage. This is why I'm saying that at this stage, when we're writing the exegetical truth, it's a statement in our own words, but we're only talking about what happened in the text, or what does the text say? And this is why I prefer to refer to it as an exegetical truth as opposed to a central truth, because remember that the word exegetical or exegesis means to draw out of the text, to pull out of the text what's already there. What does it say? This is why we use that word so intentionally and so carefully. It's not yet what does it mean? It's not yet what do I do with it, or what does it mean to me or to my listeners if I'm teaching or preaching this passage. First, I have to be sure that I know what does it say. Okay, this is why I'm spending so much time explaining this, and this is my preference for the term exegetical truth. So we're still very much in this observation stage. In the final teaching in this series, then we're going to begin to bridge over into interpretation and application. But for now, this is where we are. And I'll tell you that when I study a passage, whether I'm doing it for myself or I'm doing it for Bible teaching preparation or sermon preparation, I spend the majority of my time in the observation stage. I want to be sure that I get it right as I can. I want to be sure that I know what it says before I begin trying to figure out what it means and how do I apply it. So this stage is very important. Not that interpretation and application aren't. In fact, I would say if you don't get to interpretation and application, you really haven't done Bible study. But you can't just gloss over observation. Spend time there. Wrestle with the text. Figure out what it says before moving on to what it means and what to do with it. So here's once again how we've broken down our text so far. And now I'm going to show you how I go about writing the exegetical truth. And I do this for any passage that I study. And the exegetical truth is based primarily on the key center, or the main idea for the entire passage, that which you see highlighted in red. Now, really, the exegetical truth takes into consideration the entire passage, but since the key center is what I selected as the passage's main idea, I want the exegetical truth to reflect the key center that I identified. So I'm going to go to a next screen. I'm going to pull out the key center, which you see highlighted in red, and I'm going to put it at the top of the next screen to show you how I go about building the exegetical truth from the key center. And basically, it's a very simple process, but it will take you time. If you do this correctly and you do it responsibly, it should take you some time. That's okay. You want to think through this because you're capturing what does the text say. And basically, the way I do it is that I write a question and an answer. A question and an answer. Now, I'm going to work backwards just a little bit. The answer to the question is based on the key center. Okay, so you see right there, you see the box where it says answer, and you see the key center up at the top. The answer, I'm going to write the answer, and it's going to be a form or maybe a paraphrase, or it's going to look a lot like my key center, the answer to the question. The question is going to take into consideration different elements and components and aspects of the entire passage. But I already know, I have an idea of what the answer is because I already have the key center. So the question is just going to be, well, what would the question to this answer be? Okay, so as I was working through this passage, it'll make a bit more sense when I show it to you here. As I was working through this passage and I got to this step here, this is the question I wrote related to this passage in order to get me closer to the exegetical truth for this passage. Look at what I wrote for the question. What did the man Jesus freed from demons do when Jesus did not allow the man to follow him? Now, notice how this takes into consideration different components of the passage, right? It mentions how this man was freed from demons. It mentions then at the end, what did he do when Jesus didn't allow him to follow him? So it obviously cannot take every detail of the passage into consideration, but because I already know basically what the answer is going to be, I have an idea of what kind of question I can write. So when I write this question, in some circles it's known as the subject as well, then I answer it. But I answer it based on the key center, okay? So this is the answer that I wrote. The man returned home and told all over town what Jesus had done for him. Now that takes a little bit of the previous part of verse 39, but for the most part, it's based on that key center. It's the answer to the question, but the answer, notice how the answer is basically based on the key center of the passage that I identified in the previous step. So I've got my question and my answer, or in some people call it the subject and the complement, but I don't have my exegetical truth now, or not quite yet. But all I have to do is combine the question and the answer, subject and complement. All I have to do is combine them, do a little bit of editing so it smooths it out. But once I combine subject and complement, question and answer, then I will have my exegetical truth. So this is the exegetical truth that I wrote for this passage when I combined the question and the answer. Here's how it reads. When Jesus did not allow the man he had freed from demons to follow him, the man returned home and told all over town what Jesus had done for him. Notice how the question and the answer are combined, smoothed it out so it can make sense in a sentence. But if you think about it, this is what the passage is about. Now, are there a lot more details in the passage? The healing, the pigs, the condition of the man? Of course. But I'm trying to get to that key central truth, that exegetical truth or exegetical idea that will really explain the heart of this passage, at least from my perspective. You might come up with something a little bit different. That's okay. The key here is that we are doing an inductive study. We're letting the meaning come out of the text. We're letting the text say what the text wants to say. This is what the text says. And I want you to notice, in the exegetical truth, this is very key, very important. There are no theological principles. There aren't any interpretations, so to speak. There aren't any personal applications. All I did was wrote what happened in the text. That's it. Because I'm still in that observation phase of my Bible study, of inductive Bible study. All I want to know right now is, what does the passage say? And in large measure, the reason I'm so insistent, at least for myself, in doing this type of process and taking these steps to get to this is because I want to make sure that I'm not making the text say something that it doesn't want to say. I want the meaning to come from the text. And in order for that to happen, I have to let the text speak for itself. So you'll notice in the exegetical truth that I wrote, there's no application, no theological principles, no spiritual truths yet. It's just, well, what happened in the text? That's it. And one of the ways for me, in my experience, one of the ways that I keep myself from bridging too soon over to interpretation and application and staying in observation is that I write the exegetical truth in past tense. That really helps me. It keeps me from bridging over too soon to this is what it means and this is what we do with what it means. It keeps me in the then and there. This is what happened. That's all I'm interested in right now. And the reason for that, I'll reiterate this, is because in order for me to know what it means and what to do with what it means, I first of all have to know what it says, what's taking place in the text. And with all of these steps that we've done so far, I'm not going to say that it guarantees me, but it certainly gives me a lot more confidence in knowing I know what this text says. I've allowed the text to speak for itself. And I've looked at this passage inductively. I've let the meaning just come out, or what the text is saying. I'm just letting it come out through observation. I'm just seeing what's there. I'm not imposing what I wanted to say on the text. I'm letting the text speak for itself by following these steps of observation that fall into this general observation phase. So I'll read the exegetical truth one more time so you can see how all it does is explain what happened in the text. Now, these are my own words, but it's just an explanation, a brief summary of what happened in the text. When Jesus did not allow the man he had freed from demons to follow him, the man returned home and told all over town what Jesus had done for him. Now, going back to our definition of the exegetical truth, this is a statement in my own words of the central event or the central truth that the passage presents. And I think the exegetical truth that I wrote, I think it captures that well. The purpose of the exegetical truth is to state only what happened in the passage. And again, I think I did that well because we're still in that observation phase of our Bible study. In our next step, we'll begin to bridge over into interpretation and application with our next step. But up to this point, we've done nothing but observe the text. That's all we've done. We've read the text multiple times. We've identified what's there in terms of main ideas for each thought unit. We identified the main idea for the entire passage, the key center, and now we've written the exegetical truth. And I'm going to tell you again, this takes time. Okay, this isn't meant to be something that you do in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It takes time, and that's okay. Because in my experience, now this is just me, you might be different. In my experience, the more I take time wrestling with the text, as I say, wrestle with the text at each one of these steps, and including writing the exegetical truth, the more confident I am that I've studied the passage responsibly and that I have a very solid, a very good idea of what this passage says. So I'm going to encourage you, apply this step, whether you're using this sample passage and you're doing your own study along with me, or you want to apply it to another passage that you're studying, or even that you've studied before, or one that you're studying in preparation for a sermon or a teaching. Try this. Just give it a shot. Wrestle with the text. Give yourself some time to write out the exegetical truth, and you are going to see incredible dividends by applying these steps. All right, we've got one more major step to go. I hope this is providing benefit and value to you. I'll see you in the next one. God bless.